10 Hollywood stars who faked their own death. For decades, Hollywood has captivated America with tales of glamour, scandal, and tragedy. But what if the greatest performances weren't on the silver screen at all, but in the carefully choreographed deaths of some of entertainment's biggest stars? The official stories seem straightforward enough. Heart attacks, overdoses, plane crashes, case closed. But for millions of dedicated fans across generations, something about these high-profile departures never quite added up. The evidence was right there for anyone willing to look beyond the headlines, revealed a former FBI agent who specialized in celebrity cases throughout the 1970s and 80s. Some of these deaths had more holes than a B-movie script. And when you've been in law enforcement as long as I was, you develop a nose for when something dodo-escent smell right. What most people don't realize is that several of Hollywood's most beloved figures left behind bizarre clues that suggest their death were elaborately staged disappearing acts. Mysterious last-minute changes to travel plans. Wills modified days before passing. And perhaps most telling, bodies cremated with unusual haste before proper identification could be established. But nothing compares to the shocking revelation from a retired Las Vegas mortician who claims he was paid $50,000 to falsify death documents for one of America's most iconic performers. "I've kept this secret for over 40 years, he confessed in a rare interview before his retirement. But he can tell you with absolute certainty that the body in that casket wasn't who the world thinks it was. The motivation behind these vanishing acts. For some, it was crushing debt that threatened to destroy everything they'd built. For others, dangerous knowledge that made them targets of powerful enemies. And for a select few, the simple human desire to escape the suffocating pressure of fame that had transformed their lives into gilded prisons. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on Hollywood's most persistent mysteries. The 10 legendary stars who may have orchestrated their own disappearances in what could be the greatest performances of their careers. But first, let's start with the king himself, whose alleged death in 1977 launched the most enduring alive and well theory in entertainment history. And the mountain of evidence suggesting Elvis Presley may still be walking among us, hiding in plain sight. Elvis Presley, the king's greatest disappearing act. On August 16, 1977, the world received news that seemed impossible. Elvis Presley, the undisputed king of rock and roll, had been found unresponsive in his bathroom at Graceland. At just 42 years old, the official cause was a heart attack likely related to his prescription drug use. The music stopped, America mourned, and Elvis was laid to rest at his beloved Memphis estate. That should have been the end of the story. But for millions of dedicated fans, it was just the beginning of one of entertainment's most enduring mysteries. When you examine the circumstances surrounding Elvis's supposed death, the inconsistencies are startling, explained a Memphis-based journalist who has investigated the case for over 3 decades. We're not talking about vague theories or wishful thinking. We're talking about documented irregularities that would raise red flags in any standard death investigation. Let's start with the most basic question. Who exactly identified Elvis's body? Remarkably, this critical task wasn't performed by medical professionals, but by his father, Vernon Presley, who was devastated by grief and heavily sedated at the time. No fingerprints were taken. No dental records were checked. The man who revolutionized American music was allegedly whisked from this world with less formal identification than you'd need to cash a check. Then there's the matter of the death certificate itself, which contains a puzzling detail that Elvis fans have fixated on for decades: that Elvis's middle name was spelled Aaron on his tombstone, while throughout his life he spelled it Aaron. Was this a simple error or a deliberate signal from the king that something wasn't quite right? Elvis was meticulous about details like that, noted a former Graceland employee who worked closely with the singer during his final years. The idea that he wouldn't have caught that mistake on something as permanent as a tombstone just doesn't align with the man I knew. And remember, this was a man who was fascinated with disguises, aliases, and reinventing himself. That fascination with aliases becomes particularly significant when we consider what happened the day after Elvis's reported death. According to airport records that were later discovered, a man using the name John Burroughs, an alias Elvis had used for years when traveling, purchased a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires, Argentina, paying in cash and leaving no forwarding information. The timing is simply too perfect to be coincidence, insisted the investigative journalist. Less than 24 hours after Elvis supposedly dies, his known alias is used for international travel to a country that was at that time a popular destination for Americans looking to disappear. If this were a movie plot, critics would call it too on the nose. But perhaps the most compelling element of the Elvis mystery centers around his alleged work with the federal government, specifically the Drug Enforcement Administration. Multiple sources have confirmed that Elvis had been serving as an unofficial consultant to the DEA, using his celebrity access to gather intelligence on drug trafficking operations that had infiltrated the entertainment industry. Elvis had become valuable to federal law enforcement, revealed a retired DEA agent who requested anonymity. But that same cooperation had put him in danger. There were serious people, organized crime figures with connections to the music industry who had learned about his role. By 1977, the situation had become untenable. The threats were credible and frightening. This scenario forms the backbone of what became known as the Elvis Witness Protection Theory, the idea that federal authorities helped Elvis stage his death to escape threats from organized crime figures who had discovered his cooperation with law enforcement. Supporting this theory is the peculiar matter of Elvis's sudden weight gain in his final years. While typically attributed to poor diet and prescription drug abuse, some investigators believe it may have been partially intentional, an effort to change his appearance sufficiently to make a transition to a new identity more plausible. When you're as recognizable as Elvis was, you need more than just a fake ID to disappear, explained the former FBI agent. You need to fundamentally alter your physical appearance. The weight gain, the growing out of sideburns in his final months, these could have been steps in preparing for a new identity. In the decades since Elvis's alleged death, the sightings have never stopped. From Michigan to Missouri, from Burger Kings to remote gas stations, people continue to report encounters with men who bear an uncanny resemblance to an aged Elvis. While most can be dismissed as honest mistakes or celebrity lookalikes, the sheer volume and consistency of these sightings has kept the mystery alive. I'm not saying Elvis is alive, the journalist concluded. I'm saying the official story of his death contains too many unexplained elements to be accepted without question. And in the absence of definitive answers, the possibility that the king orchestrated his greatest disappearing act remains one of entertainment's most fascinating unsolved mysteries. While Elvis's case represents the most famous of these disappearance theories, our next subject's alleged death seemed tailor-made to generate similar speculation. A performer whose entire career was built in blurring the line between reality and illusion, and to this castle and so he Andy Kaufman, the ultimate performance artist's final act. When Andy Kaufman died of lung cancer on May 16, 1984 at the age of 35, even his closest friends weren't entirely convinced it wasn't just another elaborate hoax. After all, this was the same performer who had built his career on a foundation of planned deception, audience manipulation, and the deliberate blurring of where the act ended and reality began. With any other celebrity, death would be accepted as the final word. Observe a comedy writer who worked with Kaufman during his rise to fame. But Andy spent years conditioning his audience to question everything about him. He didn't just break the fourth wall. He convinced you there wasn't a wall there to begin with. Unlike most entertainers who strive for audience approval, Kaufman seemed to delight in creating uncomfortable, confusing experiences for his viewers. From reading The Great Gatsby in its entirety on stage to his wrestling career that outraged fans, Kaufman approached performance as a form of elaborate psychological experiment rather than conventional entertainment. Most tellingly, Kaufman had repeatedly discussed faking his death with friends and associates as the ultimate expression of his unique approach to performance art. He even specified that if he were to do it, he would return exactly 20 years later. It wasn't just idle talk, insisted a close friend who knew Kaufman during his final years. And he had detailed plans. He talked about the mechanics of how you would pull something like that off. The death certificates, the convincing of family members, the creation of a new identity. He was fascinated by the concept, not just as a stunt, but as the ultimate commentary on celebrity culture and the public's relationship with famous people. What makes Kaufman's case particularly intriguing is how secretive he was about his illness. While the official record states he was diagnosed with large cell carcinoma, an aggressive form of lung cancer, this diagnosis wasn't made public until the very end of his life. Even many who worked closely with him were shocked by the announcement of his illness and subsequent death. That level of secrecy made perfect sense if he was actually ill, noted the writer. But it also created the perfect conditions for staging a disappearance. When you keep your real condition private, you control the narrative completely. No one can contradict your version of events because no one else has first-hand knowledge of what's really happening. The conspiracy theories around Kaufman's death might have gradually faded if not for a remarkable incident at the 2018 Andy Kaufman Award ceremony. During the event, a young woman came forward claiming to be Kaufman's daughter, born after his death. She told the stunned audience that Andy was alive and well, watching from home, but not yet ready to make his public return. While this particular incident was later revealed to be a hoax, primarily orchestrated by Kaufman's brother, Michael, himself, perhaps hoping to channel Andy's spirit of performance, it reignited interest in the possibility that the comedian's death had been his greatest character yet. The hoax within a hoax is exactly the kind of laid deception Andy would have appreciated, the friend reflected. Even if he really did die in 1984, Heck created such an atmosphere of doubt and questioning around his public persona that his legacy includes this permanent question mark. In a way, he achieved immortality not just through his work, but through the lingering question of whether he's still out there watching the world debate his existence. Adding fuel to the conspiracy theories is the fact that Kaufman's death certificate was allegedly signed by a doctor who wasn't even on call at the hospital that day. And some insist the standard autopsy procedures for a 35-year-old with an unusual cancer diagnosis weren't fully followed. Do I personally believe Andy Kaufman faked his death? I'm honestly not sure, concluded the writer, but I know that's exactly how he would want it. The lingering uncertainty is perhaps his greatest legacy. He made us question the very nature of truth and performance to the point where even death itself becomes just another act to be analyzed, questioned, and maybe even applauded. While Kaufman's case represents a fascinating intersection of fact and conspiracy, our next subject's alleged death generated theories driven not by artistic intent, but by the dangerous world he chronicled in his revolutionary music. Westgame. Tupac Shakur, the rapper who knew too much. September 13, 1996. After attending a Mike Tyson boxing match in Las Vegas, Tupac Shakur was struck by 4 bullets in a drive-by shooting and died 6 days later from his injuries. At just 25 years old, one of rap music's most influential voices was silenced forever. Or was he? Tupac's death never made sense to those of us who knew him well, stated a music producer who worked closely with the rapper during his final years. Not the timing, not the circumstance.